Good morning. Welcome to Real Life. I'm Christopher, and I am recording from Kampala, Uganda, here on mission with some good friends of mine. And today is the first part of a new series. This is actually the first series of any real teaching that I've done. I've done some intro clips and other things, but this is where we're beginning. And as I was praying about where to start, where to begin, I thought about beginning in the beginning. It made a lot of sense. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like, if I had a cool voice like James Earl Jones, that might be interesting. But since I don't, I'm not so sure that would really go too well. So I did what every super spiritual person does, and I decided to pray about it. And because my second thought was really that I should probably come and focus on trying to convince people that God exists. But the more I prayed about it, the more time I spent with God about it, I finally heard from him, and he spoke to me directly. Don't freak out. It was not through a burning bush or anything like that. We were actually having coffee together at Starbucks. And basically, he said, Christopher, in order for people to believe that I am, first they need to believe and understand who I am. So in order for you to know that he exists, basically you need to understand and know his character. Because there's a lot of people in the world, believers and unbelievers, that really don't know Jesus. And so that's where we're going to start. See, you can be religious and still not know God. And what I mean by religious, this is my definition. Obviously you won't find this in a dictionary anywhere, but my definition of religious, it includes a belief in a God. I guess it could include beliefs in multiple gods. Never really thought about it. But the main thing about religious people is they tend to be all about the rules. They tend to be about living the good life or a good life and pleasing God through their actions, their behavior. And they've got this picture of God typically that he's someone who's sitting on a throne somewhere in eternity, and he's just kind of waiting around for them to screw up, just watching for somebody to make a mistake so that he can, basically smack them down, smite them is a cool biblical word. He might be angry, he might be mean, or at best a moody kind of God. And that may sound like a bit of an exaggeration, but think about it. Let's just start with some of the more religious people that I know of. My Jewish friends, my brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith. Whether it's 10 Commandments or 613, it's impossible to live up to your standard of living, your standard of righteousness. Yet we have no blood sacrifices, thus, according to those rules, there's no atonement, right? Now, I know some people have come along and they've come up with some excuses and some workarounds, but think about it. There's just really no way to get right with God in that belief system. My Muslim friends and brothers, when Allah places your good deeds on one side of the scale and your bad deeds on the other side of the scale and weighs them, even if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, the expression is inshallah, which means God willing. So basically, what if he's not willing? What if he's in a bad mood that day? What does that mean? Does that mean that you go to hell just because this God that you worship just didn't feel like letting you in, even though you were a good person? Most of my Christian friends are no better off. They're stuck under the same laws as the Jews. They think things like, this disease is God's judgment for my sin. They think that things like that they must confess every single sin every single week so God will keep forgiving them. They believe things like if they don't pay their tithes that they're stealing from God and he's gonna smack them down. So religion is quite frankly, it's hopeless. It's impossible. No matter how you line up and what rules you choose to follow, there's no victory in that. There's no freedom in that. And so I'm not trying to offend anyone, although I've probably already done it. But I want to challenge all of you. I just want to challenge you that you simply don't know God, at least not the God that I know. And before you get too mad at me, give me a minute and I'll introduce you to him. Because there is more, and he is real. Now, this series is not just for you religious folks. Sorry, that's a Texas term for people. It's also for my spiritual friends. When I say spiritual, I mean those of you that know that there's something bigger than you, and you know that it somehow has to do with love, a love that is real, a love that maybe seems just out of reach for some reason, you know, like impossible to maintain. Like you go and you get there, you get a little taste of it, but you can't stay there. You have really struggled to stay in that place. Well, I've got good news for you guys. You are much closer than you realize. In fact, I dare say that whether you know Jesus or not at this point, you're closer than a lot of Christians. You're closer than a lot of Jews. You're closer than a lot of Muslims. You're on the right track, and so I want to encourage you in that. And I want to show you the one piece. It's a critical piece, but the one piece that you're missing to this life that you're seeking. And then lastly, I think the people that are going to, of the groups that are going to get a lot out of this, I think the last group of people that are going to get the most out of this are those of you who have suffered a great tragedy. You know, there's been something or some things that have happened in your life that have caused you great pain. Maybe somebody died. Maybe you were told something incredibly horrible by someone claiming to be a Christian in the midst of your tragedy. There's been things, you've been abused or you've been robbed or you've been beaten or whatever. I don't know your individual story, but I know that there's great pain. I know that there is something that has hurt you so deeply, wounded you so deeply, that you may not believe you can ever recover from that. You may call yourself an atheist, but really you're not. Really, you believe in God. You just hate him so much that you wish he wasn't real. That you feel so abandoned and so incredibly helpless and alone, and you believe that it's his fault. And that's understandable. And the good news there is that he's a big God and he can take it. And I'm hoping that if you'll stick with me, if you can open your heart, and just the questions that you have, such as how could a loving God allow your mother to die that way in such pain, or how could he allow those people to do those things to you? How could that jerk preacher have said that or done that if he serves a real God? I've got something to share with you guys as well, and just I pray that you will open your hearts to what I have to say.
Good night, sweetheart.
Night, Mom.
Sleep tight, kiddo.
How many of you remember being afraid of the dark when you were little? How many of you are still afraid of the dark? So as a child, I believed in this monster we'll affectionately call the boogeyman. He was some sort of monster that lived in the closet or under my bed. Maybe you kind of went back and forth. And this guy was out to get me. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get me, though I didn't really fully understand what that meant. I just knew that it was bad. It was scary. I knew a few things about him, that he was afraid of the light. I knew that he couldn't open the closet door if I remembered to shut it. He wasn't able to get on the bed, but if my foot touched the floor with the lights off, I was a goner. So I had to remember when I was getting ready for bed at night to basically, close the door, flip off the lights, and jump from as far away as possible onto the bed in order to be safe, just in case he had already snuck out of the closet and was under there or had been under there from the night before. Now this went on for years. I was fearing this monster who would get me if I wasn't careful, until one day I wised up and I wrote my best friend's address on a piece of paper and slipped it under the bed, with all the lights on, of course. And, I never heard from the boogeyman again. He was gone after that. Oddly enough, though, that friend of mine, about 3 weeks later, did pack up and move. I never heard from him again. So, I don't know, maybe the boogeyman moved over there and got him. But I didn't have to deal with him anymore, so that was good. Now, I also had this concept growing up of God, of Jesus. Growing up, I spent a lot of time at my Mima's house, my grandmother, and I learned a lot about God. The main things that I learned about him was that his primary residence was in this massive white book that stayed on the coffee table. It said Bible on it, and we typically only opened that book when we were going to write somebody's name in it for some event or something. I learned that the reason to go to church, which I found out was God's other home, was to get prayed for when you were sick. And that was pretty much about it. Maybe once in a while on Christmas or Easter. But that building didn't have a whole lot going for it other than when you needed prayer. But the most important thing I learned about God was that if you misbehaved, if you messed up, if you stepped out of line, if you, sinned, that Jesus would get you, just like the boogeyman. And my grandmother would say things to me like, boy, you better not be lying to me because Jesus will get you when he finds out. And so I was afraid to lie to my grandmother. Still did it, but I was scared because at some point Jesus was going to find out and he was going to get me. Another one that she said that I thought was great was, boy, don't you go messing with them girls because Jesus is going to make you go blind if you don't watch out. And quite frankly, my eyesight's not perfect. I didn't go blind. I did chase a lot of girls. So I don't know if that was true or not. I don't know if maybe, if I would have kept going, I would have eventually been completely blind. But I'm not sure on that one. To be honest, it didn't keep me from messing with them girls at all. But there was this fear thing involved. And I had this idea that God was, basically a pissed off dad. And that Jesus was like the mafia enforcer, and he and the boogeyman were cousins. So the big difference was that Jesus was way scarier. Because, see, the boogeyman could only go from the closet to under the bed, but apparently you can't hide from Jesus anywhere because he's all over the place. He's everywhere. And then, one misstep and zap, he was going to get me somehow. Again, I don't know what that looked like, but it was scary. My imagination would run wild. Would Jesus eat me the way I thought that the boogeyman might? I don't know. But it was scary. And Jesus could not be hidden from for, forever, the way you could avoid the boogeyman. So this might seem a bit silly, but I'll bet money that some of you see God in a similar light. Ask yourself a few questions. And look, really think about this for a moment. Do you see God as sort of an angry stepdad? Just kind of waiting around for you to mess up so he can spank you? Think about that. Do you see him as a loving father who will never leave or forsake you? Who is with you through all the highs and all the lows? Who loves you no matter what you do, no matter what happens, that He's always going to be with you, and He's always going to love you and walk through the things of your life. Which is it? I mean, if something bad happens in your life, maybe you get sick, maybe if, it's even cancer, or you lose your job, or some other tragedy, would you say to yourself, well, I had it coming. God's just punishing me. Is that how you see God? Think about that. If something like this were to happen, would you say, God gave me this whatever to test me, or to grow, or to perfect my faith, or maybe God gave me this to draw others to Him somehow. Do you believe that God allows or causes tragedy for any reason at all? Do you believe that He's a part of that somehow, and allowing these terrible things to happen to people? I believe this. I believe that a loving Father, if He is our Father as His Word says He is, that a loving Father wouldn't treat His kids that way. I mean, a dad like that, somebody call CPS on him in a heartbeat. So personally, I don't think there's any way that I could worship a God that was mean and cruel like this. How can you, unless it's by force, and maybe some of you feel that way, how could you submit to that authority? How could you submit to that God? And more importantly, how could you love a God like that? How could you give your heart, give your life to that person, to that being? The Bible says, and I'm going to misquote this here because I don't have it in front of me, but it says, something to the effect of, which of you, if your child asked for bread, would give him a stone? And it goes on to make some more of these, comparisons. And the point that's made there, and I believe this may even be Jesus that was talking, how could, you give or abuse your child when he needs something good from you, and you being evil, you would still take care of your kid, you would still love your child. In fact, the word says that a man that doesn't provide for his family is worse than an infidel. How could you be that good to your family even though you are evil, and God not be like that, not be even better than that? How could God not love His children to an even greater degree? So, essentially, the way I would put it in modern terms is, would you take your child's hand and shove it into a light socket to teach that child that that's painful and bad and no and all that, to prove that electricity is dangerous, so that he or she'll grow up and tell the world not to touch it? Would you do something like that to your kid? Or even stand by, here you go, or even stand by and watch as your child did that, and just allow him to do it on his own without at least trying to prevent it, without at least giving your child a warning? None of you would do that. I hope none of you would do that. If you're watching this and you would do that, then we need to have a side conversation here, because none of you as parents, being imperfect as we all are, would do something like that, at least not on purpose, right? So what about God the Father, this God that we look to for our provision, some of us anyway? How could He do things like that? So, fortunately, I ran into Jesus one day when I was chasing a woman, and He not only helped me out and hooked me up with that woman, who has now been my wife for 16 years. Her name is Vicky. But we started hanging out, Jesus and I, going to Starbucks together, having coffee, and just spending some good time together alone, quite a bit. And as we started to get to know each other, and he seemed to really know me really, really well already. It was kind of weird. I was kind of thinking stalker, but whatever. As I started getting to know him, we eventually became friends. And he showed me some things about who he is and about his character. And that's what this message is about. So stick around. This is just part one. I'll get part two posted just as quickly as possible. But before we end, I just wanted to ask you guys, I mentioned in one of my introductory videos, about how I'm going to be posting some things, or getting you to post some things in the comment section. And what I want to hear from you today is that I'd like for you to post, to comment, that just be honest. This doesn't have to be pretty, but be honest. I want you to answer this question. I want you to think about this until next time, and post in your comments. If you could ask God, if God exists, okay, maybe you don't believe in him, maybe you do, maybe you call him something else, but if there is a God, and you could ask him one question, just one, what would that question be? Post that in your comments for me, and I will see you soon. Have a blessed day. And this is Christopher Holder. This is Real Life, and I'm signing off from Kampala, Uganda. Have a good one. Bye.